Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Je Vaughn Show. I am your host, as always, Je Vaughn, and today we're going to cover The Last Dance, which was it's a 10-part documentary, but we got to see two parts of the documentary yesterday. And I said, I want to talk about The Last Dance, but in 1997, 98, well, 97, I had just graduated high school, so my perspective may be a little bit different. So I said, I know somebody who actually covered the team and would know a lot more about this. And I call him the Chicago sports historian, but to you all, he will be Richard. Richard, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm
You
doing
know what?
fine,
That will
Javon.
probably
How
be.
are you, my friend?
I am fantastic. For those who are unfamiliar with your greatness and your knowledge and your history, can you tell the people a little bit about Richard Pimko?
Well, I've been covering sports since the 80s. I guess you'd say from 37, 38 years. I actually started doing some writing for a newspaper in the Chicago area in the early 80s. Then I got to cover the Bears, and I got to cover a lot of sports when I worked in St. Louis at KMOX Radio. Then I went to KRLD in Dallas, worked for a private company, worked for Bud Sports, which is the Anheuser-Busch broadcast company. Worked for another private broadcast company, taught athletes how to be in radio and television. Then I went on to Texas Cable News, where I was the voice of Texas sports, if you will, of every sport in the state of Texas for a cable outlet. Anyway, and then most recently, though, I'm with Fox 4 in Dallas, where I help to produce sports and news. But I've been around, I've covered every sport in Chicago, every sport around the country. Been to the Olympics, golf, pick it up. I've done it, World Cup. There are very few things I haven't done in terms of covering sports. So the
And
Bulls of the 90s, yeah.
yeah, so if anybody knows about the Bulls of the '90s, it's Richard. Now, before we get into the actual, some of the behind the scenes that you may have experienced or covered, what did you think of the two-part documentary yesterday on ESPN?
Oh, I think it was fantastic. I think for fans who lived during that time, they got to see a behind the scenes look at a team that nobody ever sees. Even the media doesn't get to see some of the things that we got to see and learn for the first time. For people that didn't live during that time, maybe they learned a little bit about how difficult it is to win, no matter how great your team is, no matter how great the players are, even the organization. You learn the difficulties and the challenges that are ahead for your team. And for the Bulls in this case, it was more than just Michael Jordan. You saw the situation with Scottie Pippen. You saw the Phil Jackson stuff. You saw the stuff with Jerry Krause. But what a lot of fans don't realize is Jerry Krause built that team. As much as the only part of that team that he did not bring in himself was Michael Jordan. Michael was drafted by then President Rod Thorne in '84. But other than that, the rest of that team was acquired through actions by the great general manager, late general manager Jerry Krause, who, well, you can see how people could see at the end, maybe he wasn't the most popular guy in the world.
No, he was not a very popular person at the end of it at all. And mainly because it was his insistence that even if the team went 82 and 0, that was it for Phil. I want
Well,
to go back. Well, yeah, okay.
let me say this. Before you go there, let me explain something I believe a lot of fans are not may learn, or maybe they won't learn from this special. Jerry Krause was a small man in terms of stature, height wise, small height. He was a little round. So the short, little chubby guy, I mean, and I'm not trying to be flippant about it,
Sure.
but I'm trying to say is this is a man who maybe lacked a little self esteem, and he wanted more credit than probably he got. Well, when you have low self esteem and you're not getting the credit you want, and you're trying to make a point that, hey, I'm important too, sometimes you push the envelope a little too much, trying to get attention, trying to say, I can make this thing better. And I think his lack of oh, positivity about himself, and I think Jerry Reinsdorf did him a disservice by either not reining him in or not getting rid of him when he needed to. I think that Jerry Reinsdorf could have done more to help the situation as the owner, but I don't think that Jerry Reinsdorf recognized the shortcomings, no pun intended, for Jerry Krause. And I think the best way to analogize is this with Jerry Krause is picture you go to a parade and you're a little kid and you're walking, you're trying to get to the front line to see what's going on, but the people in front of you are too tall. So you keep jumping up and down to try to get a look, but you can't. So finally you get mad and you decide to try to climb on a mailbox, and then the police come and say, get off of here. And I think that's part of the situation with Jerry Krause was people saw what they're seeing, but they're not seeing the whole thing he did. Consider something. He made a very, very bold trade on draft night when he traded the rights to Olden Polynice, a center from Virginia, to Seattle for Scottie Pippen, an unknown player from Central Arkansas. This man also went into the old Continental Basketball Association and found an assistant coach that nobody had ever heard of named Phil Jackson. So he was the man who brought everything together. Unfortunately, and this is just my opinion now from having seen this team, cover this team, that fans may not realize he felt as if, dang it, I did all this work and everybody else is getting glory. Instead of accepting the fact, give them the glory, you'll get yours, he fought it. And picture some of the people, maybe I'll mention some names today, people may realize. How about Jerry Jones, the coach, the owner of the Dallas Cowboys? He wanted all the credit. Jimmy Johnson got the credit for all the championships, but he got very little. Jerry's like, wait a minute, I don't need Jimmy. I'll hire Barry Switzer. See, I can win a championship without Jimmy. Well, that was not the right way to approach it, the way he handled it. And I think this is part of what we're seeing with Jerry Krause. Thankfully for Bulls fans, you had stronger personalities running the team in Michael and Phil. And I believe the big thing with Jerry Krause was he wanted to win, but he wanted to get, a high five. I think I'll give you one last part of this, and we'll get off of this topic. But there's there's a comparison I will make to a championship team today of a coach and general manager who accepted the fact they were not the star of the franchise and understood that if they took a back seat, the team would be successful. And how many people would even think about this? Greg Popovich and R.C. Buford from the San Antonio Spurs.
Sure.
When was the last time you saw R.C. Buford running around saying, look at me, I'm going to trade this guy or that guy. I'm going to get all the glory. Pop never does that as a coach. And yet he won 5 championships. He's had 20 consecutive years of making the playoffs, not knowing what's going to happen this year. But yes, he had Tim Duncan. Yes, he had David Robinson. Yes, he had Manu Ginobili and Tony Parker. But he also had other players too. And that's why San Antonio was successful. Well, same for the Bulls. Jerry Krause built a team, but he didn't have the confidence in himself. And instead of accepting and thanking the guys around him that he did help, he made it worse by trying to become the man when he already had the men. That's about it.
What was it like covering the team? Now, did you cover before Jordan got to the Bulls? Or were you?
I actually went to games before that, but I started covering them when he was there. And the thing about the Bulls that's fascinating, and I think that fans will laugh, but they did say it during that broadcast last night. The Bulls crowd was so poor. The Sting, the indoor soccer team, drew a better crowd. Karl-Heinz Granitza and Pato Marhetic had more of a following than the Bulls had in 1982. and
So
83.
why did you go to the games if it was like such a bad
Well,
product?
you have to
And
remember that if you're a fan, you're going to go. If you
yeah,
like basketball. My believe it or not, one of my favorite years for the Bulls was 1977.
okay,
76,
tell me about
77
77.
season, because they went on a roll. They won 20 of 24 of their last 28 games to make the playoffs.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, they ran into Portland, the eventual champion with Bill Walton. What a lot of fans don't remember, if they're not my age, when the 77 that team played, it was the first time in NBA history that when you did the starting lineups, they turned the lights off and put a spotlight down. I remember the late Jim Durham doing the games on the radio, WIND, with Johnny Red Kerr, and him saying, "The house lights have gone down. The spotlight is on. Here is your PA announcer, Tommy Edwards." This is the Tommy Edwards who is doing Bulls games now as the PA announcer at the United Center. He was the guy at the stadium, the WLS DJ. And that was an amazing, amazing run they had with Mickey Johnson, Scott May, Artis Gilmore, Wilbur Holland, and the late, great Norm Van Leer. Oh, that was so much fun. And then about 3-4 years later, as 81, they go to the playoffs again with Reggie Theus and Ricky Sobers, and they beat the Knicks, got to the second round. Who do they get? Larry Bird. Good night, nurse. You're done. So then after that, it was pitiful. They were pitiful for 2 years. But this is the thing with the fans. You're a fan. Basketball fans in Chicago wanted more than just, oh, we won a few games. Let's get something consistent.
Sure.
The Bulls were good in the 70s. They went to the finals in the conference finals when they lost to Golden State, 75. Chet the Jet Walker, Butterbean Love. People talked about when Golden State won their first championship with Steph Curry. It was 40 years before that when they won their first one. And guess who they beat to get to the finals? The Bulls.
Bulls. Yeah.
So you had good teams. But unfortunately, in the 80s, you had nothing until Michael comes in 84. So from after the 81 playoffs, they went right to the garbage heap immediately. And thankfully, Portland was nice enough to draft Sam Bowie.
Thank you, Portland.
Yes, thank you,
had
Portland.
Clyde, so
yes,
they said, we don't need Jordan. We've got Clyde.
Well, the thing about it, too, is we knew Akeem was going to go first. That was obvious. And when they did take Sam Bowie, a lot of people wondered if they would still take Jordan because Bowie did have some injuries. But thankfully, Bowie had a good year with Kentucky that last season. So that allowed Portland to take him, enticed him more. And then you saw Rod Thorne breathe a sigh of relief because he could get the star from North Carolina.
Do you think that they would have maybe made a trade with Portland had they taken Jordan?
I don't know. I wonder. Rod Thorne's a smart man. I'm sure he would have tried. Things were a little different in terms of how trades were done back then. There wasn't a salary cap like they have now where they match everything. So it was a little bit different on how they did it. But it would have been interesting to see what would have happened. I wonder if he would have done it. I mean, just wonder.
Yeah. Were you in the locker room during Jordan, Pippen together? And what was their interaction like, I guess, behind the scenes?
Well, they just like any of their teammates. I mean, when things were good, they were fine. Even when they didn't win, I mean, they didn't, like around the media, they didn't act weird or overly exuberant or overly aggressive against each other. It was positive. There was no I don't like you or I like you, and I mean they were co-workers. They respected each other and they got along. If a player didn't do what they were supposed to, Michael let him know that. Michael would say to somebody, "Hey, where were you on such and such a play? We called this play. Where were you?" He might say that.
Hmm.
But other than that, I mean, I can remember being in I'll give you one. A lot of fun for me was being in a locker room with a star soccer player. I don't know if you know the name Tattoo, but
Yeah.
was the star player for the Dallas Sidekicks. And I remember he would have the official sheet of the stats at the end of a game, and he would look at a player and he'd say to them, "You did nothing for me, 0 blocks." And that was just his reaction to a player who was on the team. Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? Well, Michael was like that too, and it wasn't that he was um, berating you he wanted you to be your best because
Would
he
would
demanded that of himself.
Did he berate when he scored 63 points and they still lost? It's as if like he's doing all of this work on his own and getting no help from anyone else. What was the reaction like after scoring 63 and still losing?
Well, first thing, he was a little bit tired, and you could see on his face that it wore on him. But part of, I think, he he's kept thinking to himself, and this is just, he didn't say this, but you can see on his face, what do I have to do to get us over the top? You can
Hmm.
see his exasperation. What a lot of fans may not understand, and I wonder, I wondered if somebody would have ever asked him this. I wonder if Walter Payton may have made a difference if he ever could have communicated with Michael. Because
Hmm.
Walter was similar in that he did everything he could for the Bears, and the team was terrible. The team was terrible. They kept
Yeah.
losing. And Walter kept fighting and kept fighting and kept fighting. And every day, and finally he got there. Well, the same Michael just kept fighting, kept fighting. And, he just knew it, if he could just keep going, then suddenly they started adding pieces. And it wasn't until Phil got there that told Michael, you're not going to win until you learn how to play with others. Phil has a psychological approach, and I think what a lot of fans may scoff at, or maybe not scoff at, but say, wow, that's an interesting thought. Remember, Michael hits that big shot in '89 to defeat Cleveland, puts the Bulls in
Hmm.
the playoffs, and I still say that was the shot that ended Cleveland's reign, because Cleveland was ascending. They were both kind of at the same point, and the Bulls beat them. So suddenly the team that with guys like Craig Elo and Brad Daugherty and Mark Price and Hot Rod Williams, they were supposed to be the next great thing. Michael hits the shot, sends them to the bottom, and suddenly the Bulls take off. Doug Collins was a coach. Doug Collins was one of the most enthusiastic and smart coaches you'd ever want to meet. But he wasn't as cerebral as Phil. And
Hmm.
what Doug was more emotional. When the Bulls fired Doug Collins that summer, I will never forget when they fired him. Fans were going nuts. Who is Phil Jackson? What are you doing? I remember Harry Carey on a Cup broadcast. Oh, Jerry Reinsdorf strikes again. Here we go. I'm sure glad Michael Jordan wasn't in the room because it was, you just fired a playoff winning coach, a coach that got you to the playoffs for the assistant nobody's ever heard of. But Phil's approach was something nobody knew until he got there. He was then able to implement a philosophy of
Hmm.
teamwork. Michael, you are the star. Yes, but your team is only going to win if you let them be part of you. And once Michael understood that, you would see in games where early on he'd get a pass to Luke Longley or to Bill Cartwright the first trifecta, if you will, the first three-peat. He'd get a pass off to a Cartwright, as I said, or a Horace Grant. They'd move the ball around. Phil would say on the bench, "It's not time. It's not time. Everybody keep moving. Everybody keep moving." And then he would say, "Now it's Michael's time." And that's what this team had to learn. They had to learn how to win as a team, not learn how to win as individuals. And Michael had to learn that as well.
Which goes back to Jerry Krause maybe recognizing that, we've got Doug Collins. He's a great guy, great enthusiasm. he's not what the team needs. And
Right.
so it's interesting to me then that Jerry needed so much credit when it seems like within his realm, people knew who he was and the impact that he was having. Why did it have to be bigger than the people that knew? It's
Well, that
unfortunate that
that's
that's what
why I
had to happen.
say, Javon. That's why I say it goes back to that self-esteem. And when you are not the biggest person in the world, and I don't know Jerry Krause growing up, so I don't know anything about that. But you can understand when you are small in stature, and you're looking to become the big man, how you can feel all of a sudden, oh man, I'm not getting any credit. Well, if you don't have confidence or self-esteem, you suddenly push the envelope more and more and more, trying to get it. And that's
Hmm.
unfortunate that happens, but it's natural. You know the old Bible story about Zacchaeus and Jesus. He was trying to go see Jesus, but he could never see him. He was too small. He climbed the
Yeah.
tree. And that's kind of what Jerry Krause was. Jerry Krause was a guy that wanted to climb the tree so that he could get a look at me, everybody, look at me.
I'm here.
But
Tell me about.
yeah,
Well, I had a question that was asked on. It was on one of the social medias, and it said if John Paxson was here to see the demise of Jerry Krause and to see how a front office can mess up a championship window, why did he let what happened to Thibodeau happen to Thibodeau? What's your opinion on that?
well, one of the things I'm saying is that running a team is not easy, and I think fans think that they can run a team. They think they can hire a coach and they can get the right players in and they can get everything to work perfectly. Well, the fans are silly. I remember why Mike Ditka used to get so frustrated with some of the media is that they'll sit down and they'll say, well, coach, why didn't you do this? Well, I wish they could have done that, he probably would say. I heard something the other day that was really interesting. And I think it was Tom Brady who said it. He said a coach can call a play, but he won't know whether that play is going to work or not. It's up to us on the field. It's second down and 7 yards to go. It's at the 42-yard line. Okay, we see the defense is bringing in the nickel. They're bringing their nickel.
Mm-hmm.
So here's the play we're going to call. We worked on this week. And Brady said, okay, that's a good call. But then I have to go on the field and look and see what is the other team doing. Sure, they brought in the nickel, but how are they rushing? How are they lining up? How are they adding coverage? The coaches don't see that because they can't. They only have 15 seconds to call a play. The other 15 seconds is up to the players. And I've had coaches show me, especially on offense, 10 things have to go right for certain plays to happen. 10 things have to go right. And if you misread anything, the play is going to look stupid. And you're going to look like the worst coach in the world. But Brady said, if I read this correctly, we're going to make the right call. And I'm going to make the right play adjustment. And so fans think, well, Matt Nagy can't call an offense. Brady showed it. There was a play I saw where Brady called this play from the line of scrimmage. And it was the same play he just scored a touchdown on. But it was a little different in how they move the players around. Anyway, it was basically a similar play to what they just scored a touchdown on. But he said there was a rush change and one player on the offensive line made a mistake. And because of that mistake, he didn't see Rob Gronkowski open and wound up throwing the ball into coverage, and it got knocked down.
Sure.
Now, fans are going to say, what a terrible play call. Oh, Josh McDaniels an idiot. Well, no, he was an idiot. The left tackle made a mistake. The left guard made a mistake. But fans don't see that because it's so fast. Well, similar here with John Paxson. He's a player. He learned a lot. He saw a lot. It's not that easy.
Yeah.
It's not that easy. I'm going to bring up the Spurs again because I remember in '99, they were coming out of the lockout. And I remember when they just started playing the games again. About 3 games into the season, the lead story on Ken's 5 in San Antonio is Greg Popovich about to be fired. And it was crazy. You're kidding, right? This soon? What? And all of a sudden, they go on, they win a championship. Do you realize if Peter Holt would have, was Red McCombs back then, but if Red McCombs would have fired Greg Popovich in January of 1999, we don't have a team that's won 5 titles and 20 years of successful victories. I mean, 20 successful seasons and 5 NBA titles. I mean, just think about that. He almost gets fired. And what else are we going to have? How about this one? I got one more for you with that. In 2013, 2012, 2013, hockey has a lockout. What is the paper, Chicago Tribune columnist writing? When this is done, let's trade Patrick Kane. We got to start looking to trade Patrick Kane. Well, thank God Stan Bowman didn't listen to him. A lot of people can complain about Stan Bowman right now. But then he did not listen to the media. He kept his druthers. He let Joel Quenneville coach the team. What did they get? A Stanley Cup championship in 2013. Start the season with 24 straight games without a regulation loss. And then they win another Stanley Cup 2 years later. But, of course, fans aren't satisfied now because things aren't as good. This is not easy. This is hard. And the key is keeping your ego in check. Stan Bowman keeps his mouth shut. He tries. He may get fired in a year or so for the mistakes he's made, but he's not causing a rift in the locker room. He may, like I say, if Rocky Wirtz is happy, he's going to keep a job. If he's not, he's going to get fired. John Paxson had opportunity after opportunity, but things aren't that easy. Could he do anything about Derrick Rose getting hurt?
Nah.
No, he couldn't do anything about Derrick Rose getting hurt. Could he do anything about any of the other players and things that went on? When Derrick Rose got hurt, the whole thing got blown up.
Yeah, but I still could have kept Thibodeau.
Yeah, but I mean, the situation, you got to look at. The other thing is with Tibbs, he's a very tough coach to play for.
Yeah.
And that is another thing you got to look at. The problem is you've got too much with today's player. I wish he would have kept Tibbs. It was a lot to go with. There's a lot of questions that go on. But, again, it's not that easy. And it looks we think it's easy, but it's not.
Listen, if you give me the Cubs, I can make it look easy. I think even there was a quote in there about that Michael Jordan said, the reporter asked him, how do you go from this to that? And he was like, it's easy. It's easy. But we all know that it's not just simple. It's not just easy. I only have 2 more minutes, Richard, and I got to get these in.
Okay.
First question that I got to get to you. So this is the anniversary, 63 points, 1 game against Boston. Will it ever happen again?
By a player, possibly. I hope it's a Bulls player that does it, but it could happen.
Maybe Levine. Who knows? Maybe Zach can
LeBron,
put in.
Yeah.
Or Zach
Kawhi
can drop 65 for for the Bulls. You never know.
And don't forget about Giannis Antetokounmpo.
That whole name. Yes, him. And one more before we go. I'm a huge Cubs fan. You're a huge Cubs fan. In 1997, which is still around this era of the Bulls dynasty, the Cubs lost 17 games in a row to start the season before they won their first game, which was on this date back in 1997. Your 1-minute version, do you remember anything about that season?
Yeah, it was the second game of a doubleheader that they actually won it in New York. And that was a 4-3 was the final. Sammy Sosa was 3 for 5 with a double in the game. They got 2 runs in the 6th, 2 in the 7th, and held on. Kevin Foster was the winner. That's the thing about that particular season. You had guys like Mark Grace and Sammy, but the team just was bad. It just happened. It was Cubs back then. That's all it was.
Wow. Well, hopefully the Cubs, when the season does come back up and we resume play, hopefully the Cubs will be good. The Bulls will be somewhere. The Bears will, new quarterback, maybe. We'll see. We have a lot of sports to get to, Richard, and we have run out of time to talk about it today, but hopefully you'll come back and talk to us again about some Chicago sports or sports in general. Can we open up that invitation to you right now?
No problem, my friend. Happy to do it anytime.
I appreciate you, Richard. Thank you so much for joining us today. All
Take care.
righty, that was Richard, big, huge Chicago historian with sports, now here in Dallas. We thank you for joining us. We thank you for joining us today on the Je Vaughn Show. Please like today's episode and share it with your Chicago Bulls fans or your Chicago fans in general so they can get that behind-the-scenes perspective of The Last Dance. I'm Je Vaughn. Take care of yourselves and each other. Thank you so much.